So this here is an Indian single malt from the Paul John distillery. And I'll tell you right away that I think this stuff is pretty good, but I definitely prefer the sequel, George Ringo. Definitely not the first time that joke has been made. This is Paul John Brilliance. So yeah, Indian whiskey from the Paul John distillery. I think sometimes they just call it the John distillery, but Indian single malt basically, because world whiskey is now a fully fledged thing, and a lot of them are making really good stuff that challenges what we're getting from Scotland. For a long time here in the UK, the name in Indian whiskey was Amrit, but this stuff from Paul John is becoming more and more available, and this expression, Brilliance, bearing in mind that it's 46%, is pretty affordable here in the UK at about £35. Details from the label and the tube. On the front it tells us that it's 46%. Brilliance is the name of this expression. It's an unpeated single malt whiskey and it's non-chill filtered. What about colouring, I hear you say? Well, if you look at the back of the tube, I'll just give you a little close-up of that so you can pause it and read it if you want to. Hopefully you can get that. But on the bottom it says that it's 46% and 80.5 proof, interestingly, for export overseas. We know that this particular one that I've got was manufactured, so I guess that means bottled, on the 22nd of September 2021, and it's batch number 2. But at the bottom, what I was talking about, it says does not contain any added flavour and colour. Also, excitingly, if you look at the bottom of the tube, or at the top of the tube, it's got elephants on it. And who doesn't like elephants? Less interestingly, along the side, it's got all the medals and awards that it's won, including a 94.5 rating from Jim Murray himself, and stuff like the International Wine and Spirits competition. But really, I don't know about you, but I couldn't care less about any of those things. So let's get it out of the tube. For anyone that hasn't heard of Paul John Distillery or John Distillery, they've actually been making single malt since 2008, but they actually have a lot longer history than that because they've been making blended products out in India since the 1990s. The distillery itself is based in Goa, and for all of their products they use Indian barley. Interestingly, when they make peated whiskey, they do actually import Scottish peat from Aberdeen and Islay, although this release in particular is unpeated. Cork closure, and that cork has a nice little pop to it. Very good quality cork actually. Let's get some in the glass. Nice bottle. The only thing that I would say is that my bottle, the labels are all peeling off. This isn't something that you really see very often. But it's not just one, it's kind of all of them. It's a little bit not ideal, but I suppose this whiskey has made its way halfway around the world, so give it some slack maybe. So we know that is natural colour. So we can probably assume that this is a fairly young whiskey because out in India, because they have a much warmer climate than we have here in the UK, their whiskey tends to evaporate very quickly. The angels are particularly thirsty out there in Goa, so anything really old is going to disappear quite quickly. So it's interesting that the whiskey in those, shall we assume, 4 or 5 years, it's picked up that amount of colour. Probably tells you something about how active their casks are. So Paul John Brilliance on the nose. Sweet and sugary. In particular, I'm getting a strong note that's really reminiscent of treacle. Kind of like a refined, condensed, syrupy sugariness. Also getting some bitter, slightly chalky medicinal lemons, a little bit like lemsip on the nose. Moderately spicy sawn oak. Wood spice, a little bit of nutmeg and a little bit of ginger. Actually really reminds me of treacle cake, you know, the Lion's ginger treacle cake that comes in the green packaging. So it's basically treacle and ginger. I think that on the nose of this one, it's quite obviously young, and it is noticeably youthful with a little bit of doughy, starchy oak. But it's complex and bold and on its way to maturity. Let's see how it tastes. Slightly dry and spicy oak again, more of that obvious, very active. I'm tempted to guess probably virgin oak casks, or at least very, very active bourbon oak gone into this. A slightly starchy, youthful quality, but also some sweet, honeyed malt. The more that you taste this whiskey, the more that maltiness starts to come out. There's really a very pleasant and seemingly very well made, intense sweet maltiness lurking beneath that layer of intense, dense oak. A little bit of honeyed sweetness, musty lemon, again with that pleasant oak spice. I think that this Indian whiskey from Paul John is quite bourbonish. And again, it makes me wonder, I think it says American oak, if you read the back of the tube has been used to mature this. But how bourbonised this is, and all that oak spice, it makes me wonder if they are American oak bourbon casks, or if there's some virgin oak gone in there. As for the finish on this one, actually pretty long, especially considering that this is almost certainly a pretty young whiskey. It's got quite a long lingering finish, sweet and light, with more of that lingering treacle and spiciness. So all in all, very nice flavours, and a similar fruity maltiness to what I remember getting from Amrit unpeated single malts. But it has to be said that it is a noticeably young whiskey, and I think I'm getting more youth from this one than I got from the unpeated Amrit single malt, and for that reason I'd probably prefer the Amrit over this. As for a grade, I'm going to go with a respectable C- on this one, so just creeping into what I'd call good. It actually reminds me, with that really robust, well-made malty character, with all of the heavy wood spice, reminds me a little bit of the Glasgow 1770 releases, in that it's a young but fruity and intense malty whiskey with a hell of a lot of wood spice. Saying that, I probably do prefer this to the Glasgow 1770 releases. So, John Paul Brilliance, is it good? Yeah, it's good. It's not exactly my style of whiskey, but I think that it's well made, honestly made. I really like that they're giving a full craft presentation, apart from telling us or not telling us how old this is. And I also think that it's very sensibly and proportionately priced, considering it's been halfway around the world. At £35, I've got no problem recommending this, and probably not soon, but I would buy this again. So yeah, India has now made the list of countries that make decent whiskey. A list of world whiskey distilleries that gets longer by the year, and India has now got 2 on the list. Yeah, it's definitely got some good things going on there. Lots of interesting flavours, and I think that this one is going to probably appeal quite a lot to the bourbon drinkers out there, as well as the more adventurous Scotch drinkers. Thanks for watching, and cheers.